nothing unusual for me. Anyway, go ahead and call this meeting to order of the Arizona Board of Technical Registration. It is June 25th, and not according to my laptop, but according to Kurt's, it is 9 a.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. Julie, would you kindly do roll call?
Ms. Wohal?
Here.
Dr. Campbell? Dr. Campbell? Mr. Gilmore?
Here.
Ms. Klett?
Present.
Ms. Hobick?
Present.
Mr. Kaleka?
Present.
Ms. Lindgren?
Here.
Mr. Nesgood?
Present.
Mr. Sales?
Present.
Ms. Skanke?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julie. All right, moving on to enforcement matters. We have quite a few that are complaints proposed for dismissal. And just for the board's a heads up, we are going to take agenda items 2, 3, and 4 related to Mr. Mark Fleetwood. We're going to combine those into one discussion. And then we are also going to do the same with agenda items 10, 11, and 12. So just so that everyone's aware. All right, let's move on to the combined agenda items 2, 3, and 4 related to Mr. Mark Fleetwood. Mr. Cartel, if you wouldn't mind giving a brief synopsis for the board.
Good morning. Brief might be a little bit relative. A couple things about these cases that I would like to make clear ahead of time. The investigation was focused specifically on Mr. Fleetwood's responsibilities and actions as an engineer. It does involve a utility company, contractor, and the Department of Environmental Quality. So there are aspects that the investigation did not delve into because of our limited jurisdiction. I'd also like to point out for the record that ADEQ, from what I understand, may have their own investigation going on as well. However, that agency has a very different jurisdiction than ours. So there'll be some information that may or may not overlap. So back in January of last year, there were 4 cases brought for the same situation with the same engineer. Mr. Fleetwood had been hired by the Cedar Grove Water Company to design a water extension for an area in Vernon, Arizona, and to obtain documents necessary for permitting through the ADEQ. Mr. Fleetwood did so, and the construction was completed. The allegations coming through the complaints at that point were related to what had happened during construction. One was that the trench was not compacted properly, and the alleger had provided some information possibly verifying that that is the case. There's also a complaint that the construction led to flooding and a degeneration of the road itself, and that debris was left, which made it difficult to traverse the road. At that point, it went out to assessors. The assessors looked over it and opined that Mr. Fleetwood was not responsible for the elements that were complained about because his scope of work was limited to the initial plans, preparing documents necessary for the EDEQ permitting, and as-built plans afterwards, and that his scope of work did not include supervision of the construction inspection, or project management. And I believe it was May of last year the board dismissed those cases on that premise. In October of, my dates may be a little bit off, several months following that board meeting, we received 3 additional cases, which is what we're reviewing today. Those cases were initiated due to some additional information that was obtained by one of the allegers, Mr. Omer. He had hired a underground utility locate company and a land surveyor to document where the line physically lies at the current time. Between those two companies, or between the locate company and the land surveyor, they verified that the line in a significant portion of the line was not in the location that Mr. Fleetwood's as-built states that they are. And therefore the complaint was filed alleging that he was negligent in that his as-builts were not correct compared to where the line currently physically lies. Throughout the investigation, we found information that, I'll backtrack a little bit. Our response from Mr. Fleetwood, again, he reiterates his limited scope of work and acknowledges that the as-built very well could be mistaken. His explanation for that was that his as-builts were based on information received from the water company. His indication was that when he was told by the water company that the water line was completed, he based his as-builts on information provided by them. He said he received no red line corrections that would lead him to change his as-builts, and was told by the water company and the contractor that the line was built per inspection, or per plan. So he completed his as-builts based on that information. An additional information received indicated that shortly after the completion of the plan, or completion of the construction, heavy rainfall came and there was pretty significant flooding, which wiped away any indication of where the trench was prior to that flooding, which would have made it impossible for him to go on site and physically see where the trench was laid. We sent this out to assessments. Both assessors opined that he was not negligent. One assessor indicated that the water company or the contractor may have been negligent in failing to indicate that the line was moved, but that was outside of our respondent's purview. He also indicated, both assessors indicated, that it is common and acceptable for as-builts to be based on red line drawings received from a contractor, which would differ significantly from a special inspection, which would need to be more in person. So both assessors found that he was not negligent. I apologize, I had a lapse in thought. So based on that, our recommendation is that it is dismissed on those grounds.
And that is the case for all three agenda items, is that right, Mr. Cartel?
Yes, sir. We had two assessors review all three cases combined, and they both came to the same conclusion.
I just want to make sure no one here had any confusion as to which case we were discussing. So we do have a couple individuals, one in particular who wishes to address the board, one who may wish to address the board. I don't know if Mr. Fleetwood is on. It says he has a schedule conflict, may or may not appear. So, Julie, do you know if Mr. Fleetwood is on?
He has joined the call, yes.
Mr. Fleetwood, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Great. Would you like to make a statement to the board related to what you've been hearing here from Mr. Cartel, our investigator?
I don't think I need to make a statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Dean Ulmer, the alleger, wishes to address the board. Mr. Ulmer, if you're here, would you like to come forward? Please state, again, you have to hold down the button so it goes green. And please state your name for the record.
My name is Dean Ulmer. I would love to thank the board and the chairman for allowing us to speak in regards to the water line that was the the public water line that was run down a private easement. in the last board meeting that was held on 5/23 of 2023, the biggest concern that we had at the time that the board suggested, let me go back just a little bit. The discussion was about where is the water line placed in the road, because the importance of placement of the water line would determine, in Fleetwood's statements last time, whether or not the compaction was required or not. Well, in his location, or in the location that was turned over to the ADEQ, the location might be in an argumentative point, but if it was in the middle of our road, that would be a different deal. So it's all based upon where the water line is. Well, we hired on the advice of the board to get a certified water line survey to show exactly where the water line is, and we have that. There's a huge significant difference in the as-built and that was turned over to the ADEQ and the actual location of the water line. If you have that chart in front of you, number 14, location on our plan, or on our water line survey, is,
just for the board's reference, that is page 2089 in the board packet.
is 21 feet off in a 30-foot easement. The as-built turned into the ADEQ is on the north side of 3556. The water line runs the entire length of 3556 on the south side of the easement. The valve access pipes are standing in the middle or near the middle of our roadway, restricting our drive to get to our homes. Mr. Fleetwood has stated that the water line was on the outer 2 feet of the easement. I don't feel like, personally, that we can blame the water company for this because he's the one with the stamp. He's the one that has to sign it. The ADEQ indicated to us last time, Karen Tyler indicated that there were no changes submitted to the ADEQ regarding red lines on a as-built. And so we argued this point last time. We now have evidence showing that the water line does not run down the edge of the road. It runs in the middle or near the middle of our road on the corner of 3555 and 3556. It's dead in the center. In fact, when they did the installation, they tore out property corner on that corner, and I had to pay to have a surveyor bring that back in. So I'm sure that Mary has a lot more she can add to this, but it's just a big deal, and I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Ulmer. Mary Kennedy, is that right?
Yes. My name is Mary Kennedy, and I want to bring back the what Mr. Fleetwood agreed to do when he signed on by certifications that he would be the engineer of record for ADEQ on this project. And part of that responsibility as engineer of record is to do a site inspection. And he said that he did do that, and based on that site inspection alone, he would have seen that there were missing valves on some roads and new valves 80 or 100 feet away from where his plan shows they would be. The water line on one side of the road when it should have been on the other side. To me, that, you know, he had a visual inspection he was doing on behalf of ADQ, a state agency. He's supposed to be protecting the public. He apparently is using information to prepare his as-built that doesn't include any of his site visit. That would have, to me, raised a red flag that there's something not correct going on here. And yet he went ahead and submitted that to ADQ. And the line was put into public use based on what he submitted. Everything about what, you know, we learned in the last meeting is that there was no compaction done on this project, and we know that his plans call for compaction. So that, to me, it puts that line in an unsafe public use condition, because thrust blocks require compaction around them, the valves require compaction around them, the trench requires compaction, and none of that was done to our knowledge. But I know that you guys are limited in what you can hold the engineer accountable for. But the fact that he agreed by certification that he would be the one who is an engineer of record on behalf of ADQ, and then he signed a certification after the construction was complete and submitted all the documentation that put that line into use, that to me gives him accountability. That there is a certain amount of accountability, and even if he did a site visit, to claim that you can't see standing pipes over these valves that are made of PVC and they don't meet the MAG standards that he has on the plans, that makes no sense to me. I can look at the plans and see that those are PVC pipes over those valves, and it's in the middle of our road, so now we do have to drive around them, and it's just the whole site has just deteriorated because I'm afraid to put money into the road because that line could blow out any time, in my opinion. I think that's the problem, is it's a public safety issue. And just one last thing, I know that we have been discussing this over a year now with you guys. The engineer has been made aware on more than one occasion of the issues that we are seeing, and I don't see him having made a single attempt to verify himself and notify ADQ that there's a problem out here. And so the problem is continuing. ADQ keeps the line working because there's no evidence being provided to them. Otherwise, that's how much they rely on that engineer's documentation that he submitted. And that's why we're here today, just to say, look, we brought you proof that you guys suggested in the meeting last year that would be good evidence to get this discussion open again. And so here it is, and we're just asking for just some time that you guys would please look at that. And I feel like ADQ needs help. I would hate to be in ADQ's position, you know, right now. But it's hard for them. They have told us they can't help us because they rely so much on the engineer. So that's what I'm hoping, is you'll look at this and understand that there's more than just what was contractually done. There are certifications that were signed by this engineer taking responsibility.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you, Mr. Ulmer, as well. Appreciate you coming down to speak to us. There is one other individual who may or may not wish to address the board. That is Mr. Darrell McBroom. That individual is
He is unable to be here. He called me last night. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem.
If I may add a little bit to Mary's statement. On the PVC pipe that is on 3555, it stands 19 inches out of the roadway. It is exactly 7.5 feet from the center of the roadway. So if Mr. Fleetwood were to show up on that site, he would have had to have driven into the neighbor's lot to get around it. It's so obvious. You show up in the middle of the late afternoon and you can't get to your home because there's a 6-inch pipe standing up in the driveway. It's pretty obvious somebody hasn't done their job.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from Mr. Cartel. Yes.
I apologize. I'd like to make a couple of clarifications if I could. Firstly, I believe the investigation and information provided by Mr. Ulmer does fairly confidently verify that the as-builts are incorrect. And that was acknowledged by our assessors. The question at hand regarding that is who's responsible for that incorrect information. It's the opinion of our assessors that responsibility does not lie with respondent, but with possibly with the contractor who provided or failed to provide that information. Additionally, the term engineer of record is not a blanket term to cover all aspects of the project. His scope of work was fairly clearly stated in the agreement between him and his client, with limitations that have previously been laid out and were a significant portion of the initial investigations. So that the question isn't so much whether they were wrong or right, but whether our respondent is responsible for that incorrection or not. Regarding the site visit, I'm sure Mr. Fleetwood can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that the site visit was an initial site visit before construction was done, verifying that everything was good to go on what he had designed initially. His as-builts, from what I understand, his as-builts after the fact were not based on a site visit, but based on information received from the contractor, in that he would have expected to receive red line drawings that would document field changes that were made, as opposed to checking himself in person on site, as would be expected with a special inspection. However, with the as-built, from what I understand, carries a less degree of inspection as opposed to a special inspection.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Fleetwood first, just to confirm whether that is what Mr. Cartel is saying is correct. Mr. Fleetwood, would you please clarify whether you had more than an initial site visit and if there were any additional visits in your scope of work?
Yes. So the scope of work was design, and then they call it approval of construction. ADEQ calls it approval of construction. And that's essentially the as-built, filling out a form for ADEQ, and then also the pressure test. So the day that the pressure test was done, I was on site, so that was after completion of the job. And I did notice the valve, I don't know the road names off the top of my head, but I did notice that one of the valves was high at that time. And I said, you're going to need to lower that, put a valve box on top and a valve cover at grade level, and that's at the intersection. So that's been done for over 2 years. There is another. I was just there actually 2 weeks ago on a different job that was nearby, so I drove down the road. There is another valve box that is sticking up a little bit on the edge of the road. Being in the middle of the road is greatly exaggerated, but that's not really my issue at this point. The water company could lower that and probably should lower that. And as far as the scope of work, it was described correctly. It was really just the design and then the approval documents after the construction. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 second, Mr. Ulmer. I'd like to hear from our civil engineer board member on this matter first, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Scott Sales. Thanks for coming down and showing up today and giving us some more information there, as well as Mr. Fleetwood for dialing in. So, looked at the survey map, and so based on looking at it, I just want to So make sure we're all on the same page. Looking at it based on that information, my understanding is that everything is within the 30-foot easement. Is that your take on it as well, from those lines and everything on there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir, it is.
Excellent. All right. And then, Mr. Cartel, you took a few of my questions for me, but that's okay because they were already answered. They're related to the site visit, because I saw the section on site visit, and so doing a site visit prior and then not being out there during construction, to me it's somewhat standard practice, depending on the contract, that you would ask the contractor, hey, are there any changes? They would send you red lines. You would incorporate those. Sometimes they might ask you to come look at something if there's a concern or something, but if there's not, then you don't typically go on out there and look at it. So looking at the information available there, seeing that, I'm not going to point fingers one way or another, somehow the information, from what information we have, there were no changes to the plans from what Mr. Fleetwood knew. And then I saw in one of the letters that once, and Mr. Fleetwood, maybe you can confirm this, once you learned that the information was in the wrong spot, that you then went and updated the plan sheets, or did you offer to update the plan sheets so that they reflected what was out there in the field?
I have not updated them yet. I wanted to wait till after the hearing was done, but I did discuss it with the water company, and that's when I really found, after our last hearing is when I found out that a portion of that line, approximately 1,000 feet, maybe 1,300 feet, did get placed on the other side of the road, which would be the north side of that road. That's the section that where it is off. And just another note, even though there is a survey here, the survey is based off the property lines, which the property lines are supposedly in the center of the road. I don't believe the road is actually, the center line of the road is actually not the property line. Not that it matters one or the other, really, but some of those descriptions may or may not be as accurate as you would think, because you're thinking of a road you're thinking of a straight road. If you look at the photos that I took last December, and I'm not sure what page number those would be on, you can see the condition of the road and the unstraightness of the road, I guess.
I guess that's really my open up from another discussion from the standpoint of knowing what Mr. Fleetwood knew at the time. To me, it appears that he prepared the documents knowing what information he knew, and then he did reach out to the water company and say, okay, we'll update it now that we know there's some updates. Now, when it comes to the interaction between ADEQ and the other ones, I think that's a little outside of our purview on what they're require on documents and such, and what terms they want to use in the definition of the term that they're using on H1, because there's as-builts, record drawings, some of the other special inspections, all these other different words that are out there. So I'll pause for a moment.
Mr. Chair, yes, it's Keith Smith. I'm not an engineer, so I'd like to kind of direct this to Scott here. But is there a standard for creating as-builts? I mean, do you physically go out there and look at it, or do you rely on information that's been sent to you?
From my experience, it's you're relying on the contractor or the resident engineer if they pull you in and say, look at this, or here's the red lines for a whole big project, and then if the engineer were to look at that and go, well, I don't like this or this, you never talk to me, then they should speak out to someone and say, hey, this was put in this way, but maybe it needs to be fixed or something. That's that due diligence there. There's also, this is where Mr. Donald can pop in here, I believe there's a revised statute out there related to the term as-built as well, and record drawing, not as-built. It's used. That went into effect a couple of years, I don't know, 5 years keep flying by, but 5, 6, 7 years ago. I'll opine that there's a ARS out there. I'm pretty sure there is. It helps you define what that term might mean.
I would take your word for it. All right. Before we vote, Mr. Ulmer, any final thoughts? Any final thoughts?
Well, the roads weren't in the shape that they're in today. They were straight, fairly straight. Of course, they have been detoured around access pipes. Those stand 19 inches tall. The information that Mr. Fleetwood is claiming to have gotten from the contractor, it is a contractor that is not a licensed contractor. It was a group of guys that had no clue what they were doing when they were doing it. The reason I say that, because I have 50 years experience in this type of work. I'm a general contractor with 5 different licenses in the state of Arizona. For him to blame the water company over this much discrepancy would be like me blaming the plumber that the roof is leaking. No different. It's just out of the question. As a contractor or as a engineer, you take the responsibility to make sure the job is done correctly, especially when you have an unlicensed group of guys that might get there today and they might not. So I've seen it all. I've offered them assistance. In fact, I gave them assistance. I loaned them buckets for free. I did everything I could do to be of assistance, and this thing went real sour.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously, this board doesn't have jurisdiction over contractors, so we don't have any ability to take that matter. That's the Registrar of Contractors in that regard. But appreciate that. Board, any final discussion?
Mr. Chair, I've got a question. For all of these EAC evaluations for the 3 different ones listed, were there 3 different EAC members? So did you have 9 total, or were there 3 that did all 3 of those? I looked at the names.
No problem. So in the initial, the ones that were filed January of last year, there were four complaints. All 4 at that point were sent to 2 EAC members who reviewed all 4. The current one, all 3 were sent to 2 additional EAC members. So between all, or the 7 complaints altogether, there's been 4 involved EAC members.
Any other questions from the board? Yes, briefly, Ms. Kennedy, please.
Yes, I just want to say that it's really hard for me to understand that an engineer who does a site visit and who says, hey, you've got to go adjust this valve out here. That was a valve that didn't even show up on his plans. That's something that should have been shown on the plans when those as-built were submitted, and he just said that he knew about this valve. So I don't think that he's completely without accountability on this, and I don't see how experts could suggest that. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. If there aren't any final discussion points, I will open up a motion for. I'll open up for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, Scott Sales, on that last point, maybe if Mr. Fleetwood could chime in about I remember him just a moment ago and mentioning, there was something that had to be adjusted, and during the pressure testing, and so Mr. Fleetwood, could you confirm that those changes were made on the plans or not made on the plans, or what's your understanding of that situation?
So that was a drive-by inspection during the pressure test, and I had the foreman in the truck with me, and it was, hey, you need to lower that valve box. And that valve is in the incorrect spot, but I didn't notice that at the time. I didn't know what station we were at. I didn't run a survey or anything to do the as-built. I was just basing it off whatever red lines I got from the contractor at that time. So it is a mistake. The as-bilt's incorrect for that valve, and that's where that section of the line turns and goes to the west and is on the north side of the road instead of the south side of the road. And I might just add to I don't think it helps my case at all, but I know there's a lot of complaints from these 2 individuals, but this line's been in place for, I don't know, 2.5 years now, and not one leak, not one issue, and it went through a major flood, and it wasn't affected by that flood also. So there's some exaggeration, I think, on the construction of the line.
We do need to move forward, so please be brief.
The line was started on 5/23 of 2022, 22, excuse me. So it wasn't 2.5 years ago. I guess I can't say anything more except for the fact that if the board excuses this, they're condoning supplying incorrect information to the state of Arizona.
Thank you. And I do very much appreciate both of you coming in today to speak, and Mr. Fleetwood as well for speaking, and Mr. Cartel for the investigations. We do need to move forward with a motion, so I will open up for a motion by the board.
Mr. Chair, this is Scott Sales on, sorry, it goes from one page to another page. I want to make sure I remember. For item 8A, 2, 3, and 4, P24-033, P24-034, and P24-036, proposed motion to dismiss these 3 cases.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. Do we have a second?
Ms. Dana Clyde, second.
Thank you, Ms. Clint. Any final discussion by the board?
Mr. Chair, this is Scott Sales. Just on the discussion topic, based on what we've heard, or I've heard today, Mr. Fleetwood's going to be updating plans based on a newer survey. I don't know if it's a survey they provided or somebody's survey to show all these things, and I hope that gets to the water company as well as coordinated with ADQ, so they also have something in their records for the latest and greatest what's in the actual ground out there for use with blue staking and any other purposes.
Very good point.
And also, Mr. Chair, this is Keith Smith with 4 different EAC members. I'm not an engineer, they are, and I'm going with their referral as well.
Thank you. All right. Any final discussion? If not, all those in favor in the room, please say aye.
Aye.
Ms. Lindgren?
Aye.
Ms. Skanke?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Chair, the final comment. I have empathy for these fine folks about protecting their interests in their property. I think the problem is not with Mr. Fleetwood, it's going to be with the water company and the general contractor primarily. And really, what is the scope of his contract? What is the services? And I think our EAC members confirmed that he did what he was supposed to do. My concern here is really with the statement of engineer of record. I think they bring up a legitimate concern, and I think the general public relies on the fact that when an engineer of record gives that kind of certification, the general public should be able to rely on it. I think we've all had experiences where projects start construction and things show up underground they're not supposed to be there because the record documents are incorrect. We've all experienced that. So we're not going to solve this today, but I think maybe that term engineer of record and what that means requires more attention. So I am voting in support the dismissal, but I'll do what I can to see if we can maybe update that, what that means. Thank you, Chair.
And I would agree with that as well. Thank you both for coming in. Thank you, Mr. Fleetwood, for calling in as well. Moving on, we're going to go ahead and